Hi, so we're on the next stage of our field journal. Previously I had shown you how to make this faux leather cover for the journal. Today what we are going to need to do is to cover the inside of that and just work with the base and then put some signatures in. So for the inside of this journal I had bought at a charity shop this lovely Ordnance Survey map, which has a lovely linen background. I don't know if you can see it. It's quite nicely textured. It's actually printed onto a fabric backing, and it is enormous, so I can't actually open the whole thing out, but let me just try and do a section for you just to show you that it has all these lovely sort of contour lines on it, which I feel, if we're doing a field journal, will be indicating where we've been and what area we've been studying and where we've found our research material. So let me set that aside, and I have already selected a few papers and pieces of card that we can use later for signatures, so I'm going to set that aside as well. And we're just going to focus now on actually gluing down this piece of the ordnance map that I have already pre-cut. So I made the actual cover inside slightly narrower than the actual width of this, by probably about 1/2 centimeter, just so it gives me a little bit of playroom. I've folded my piece of map in half so that I can line it up accurately with the center of my book, because I don't really want to find that I've got this sliding to one side or it's coming over this flap. And I'm going to use Elmer's glue just to glue this down. I just find it grips nicely and it's easy to apply a nice thin layer. So because the backing of the map is actually quite textured, I'm going to need to make sure that I have a really nice generous layer on this, and I'm going to work on this in 2 stages. I'm going to work on the left hand side to begin with, press that down, making sure that the crease is in the middle, and then I'll come to the right hand side. I have a nice hog's hair brush here which I'm going to use just to spread this out, and I'm just going to rotate the book so it's a little bit easier to work with. Always make sure that you are comfortable in the position that you're working in. It's so often an easy thing to do is just to start working, be uncomfortable and just think, oh, I'm just going to press on, but actually by the end of it it's not been nice. So turn your things around as and when you need it. I'm going to start by brushing this up from left to right across the width of my book, and then I'm going to do this top to bottom this way so that I make sure that I haven't got any dry spots. And just maybe try and thin this out a little bit, drag some of this inwards, and you will see that your indication of it being nice and moist, ready to grip with your map, is that it is actually wet and shiny. If you have any dry spots, they're not going to reflect the light, so you're going to need to be just a little bit aware of that. I need to make sure now that the orientation of my book is correct. So my flap is going to be here on the right hand side, and this will be the top of my book. So I want to make sure that I've got these lines at the top, and I'm going to start by laying down my piece of map on the dry side of the book, otherwise where I haven't pressed the glue yet. And then I'm just gently going to lift this up, and working from the inside out, just gently press this down in contact with the actual cover, making sure that I rub really down to the corners so that I secure all those edges. Okay, this map had previously been folded in a different way to which I am using it now, so make sure where it has previous folds that you're actually making sure that those creases lie flat. When you're sure that you've got that nice and secure, I'm just going to do this in the opposite direction, and I'm simply going to now apply glue to the inside of my cover. I don't want any on the flap, so I'm just going to put a squirt over here. And then once I've got this ordnance map in as a base, I can start to embellish it with any other little things, and we'll see what comes to mind as we progress with this. So just going to put that down there, and again spread my glue nice and evenly across my surface up to the crease, but not past the crease, because I don't want to glue the flap down. And then I'm going to just put a little bit on this fold so that I make sure that that is all covered here nicely. Can you see that? Sorry, I've pulled it over towards me. Something I must be a bit more aware of. I tend to do that a bit, pull things towards me. Right, so brushing it from the folded edge where the flap is going to be down towards me, and then crisscross that to make sure that I have covered the entire surface. It's still nice and wet. One thing is the weather is nice at the moment for doing gluing. In summer it's quite a different story. And then just gently easing this down to the other side, making sure I press again into wherever the folds have been, so that this is down in contact with my surface. Now you will see that there is a little bit of excess glue here. I'm just going to wipe that off with my finger so that it dries nice and clear and without any lumps, and it will dry fairly quickly. And that's okay to have a little bit of extra. You could also use a little wet wipe to do it, but I've got a towel and I've got a finger, and for me that's just the quickest. Rub it all down nicely, especially these little wrinkled corners. And then I'm going to set this aside and leave it to dry. It's probably going to just be better to leave this to dry naturally, and I would imagine that will take about an hour or so. Generally when things are wet, they're going to still feel as cool to the touch, and as they dry they're going to feel more like room temperature. So I'll be back once this is dry. Well, the inside of my cover has dried really nicely. I'm quite happy that I have a couple of marks where the map had originally folded. One of the things just to be cautious of when you are letting something dry is that when you put glue onto paper or card, initially it looks perfect and then it starts to wrinkle, and the temptation at that point is to go in there and start to smooth things out. Don't do it, because if it looked perfect to begin with, it's going to just shrink back to dry. Paper is made up of several layers, and when one layer gets wet and the others don't, it tends to cause it to wrinkle. Anyway, the next thing I want to do is just to ink up the edges. So I've got here some Distress ink, the walnut stain, which I feel will be a nice contrast to the darker colours that I've got on the outside of the cover. And I'm literally just going to rub the edge of my ink pad along the edges of this folder. I'll do it on this side and then I'll flip it over and do the other side. This is just going to give it a nice vintage feel. And I don't want it to be too heavy, so I'm just going to go fairly cautiously with this. One thing is, if you're uncertain about the color that you're going to want to ink up with, you can start with the lighter color, and then if you feel when you've done that this is still not dark enough, you can always go back in with a slightly darker shade. It doesn't work the other way, sadly. So always go from light to dark if you're uncertain. Right, I'm going to just ink the spine of the book, or the fold, just so that that has a little bit of patina on it. Right, and then I'm going to do the inside edges of the flaps here. This is just one of the little mini ink pads, so I don't feel the need to put it onto one of those little daubers, but you could if you wished. And then because that isn't transferred to the inside, I'm going to repeat the process on the inside cover as well. And this will just give it a lovely sort of weathered look as we start working. So this is going to be the base on which we're going to start layering up our different ephemera and making this into the journal that we want it to be. I think I might also just fold the center bit a little bit, and I know that we're not going to see an awful lot of it because this will be where the signatures are sewn in, but it will just add a little bit of interest if something peeks out. Right, I'm happy with this, and I'm going to do this fold on the inside edge here as well. So just bend things as you feel your eye is leading you to ink up. Right, so this has got quite a nice browny tone, and I'm almost tempted to just lightly rub it over the outside of the cover. I did do that originally, but I think I'm just going to make this a little more brown. Interesting thing with colors is that the color that you put on last is going to subdue or push back the colors. So you can see on this area it's still quite sort of a reddy brown tone, and by just rubbing this ink pad flat across the surface, it's bringing in a slightly more brown tone. And I'm actually quite liking that for two reasons. One, because it's not as ready in color, but also it's going to tie up with the ink color that I have done my grunging with around the sides. Okay, so I'm going to set that aside now, and then we'll start to look at closures for this, because that is quite an important thing to do before we start adding ephemera. So I feel for the closure I would like to use this disc of card that I have prepared. It was just a pamphlet that I'd punched out two circles, and I'd done a bit of splattering on it. I'm going to quickly just ink around the edges of this just to distress it and grunge it up a little bit. And you do want to have something for this type of wraparound closure that is a little bit stronger than a single piece of cardboard. So in this instance I've actually glued two pieces together just to give it some sort of weight, because I'm worried that if I'm going to continually open and close it, I might actually just tear it, and that would be a waste. So I'm going to use my crocodile now to make some holes and insert a little eyelet. And you will see that when you're working with crocodiles that you do have two different size little grommets or eyelets, and you've got two settings on your crocodile. So I'm going to use the smaller one now, because this is the color of the little bronzy eyelet that I've got, and it is a small one. So when you're checking your settings, you're just going to adjust them on these little pins that you've got here by clicking them round, pull them out and round again, and round again, and then push it back into place, and you do the same thing here. It will tell you which little pads you're going to need to use for each of them. Right, so when you come to make your holes, you're going to have your holes on the sides here. That is a smaller one, and that is the larger one. So to begin with, I'm going to start by making my hole. I'm going to position my little closure in place, and then extend the cardboard out. Let me see if I can do this all in one. I need another pair of hands here. Right, so I'm going to just position that so that's in place and give that a nice good squeeze. And then I'm going to take my little eyelet and just put that over the hole like that. Then put the pin part from the top down so that it's in the hole, and just give it a nice firm squeeze. And you can normally feel it just crunch in underneath there. Alright, I have picked up a little bit of residue of some card here, but I will just use a scalpel point just to pick that out. So that's going to be my little closure. And then I have an option of some string that has a bit of dye on it that I could use as a closure, or have a little bit of this fabric. And this fabric I just dyed with some tea. It was just a bit of muslin that I had. So I think I'm going to use some of this. I'm just going to make a little snip in the side here, and because it's a long strip, I'm just going to keep tearing it. Let's see what happens. Oh, there we go. Just to tear it into a thinner strip like that. And I'm not fussed by the fact that there are some little frayed edges like this. You can sit and pull them off if you want to, or you can trim them, but I might do that once I've actually just secured this a little bit more. I'm just going to clean this up quickly. Okay, lessons learned. So I was a bit impatient and waiting for the glue to dry, and I punched that little eyelet through when the glue was still a bit wet. That's why it got stuck in the middle. So I have just put a replacement eyelet in there now, and the glue is dry. So I've got a piece of this muslin fabric that I've dyed, and I'm going to use this as my closure. You'll see at the top here that I've actually split this into a V so that I can gently thread this underneath my little button that I've made here, and just tie it tightly underneath there. I don't want to bend this too much, and I don't want it to be too bulky. There we go. So I'm just going to give that a loose knot there. It's not going to come undone, and you'll see that that will be fine. I can trim the tails off if I wish, But now I have a closure that I can actually wrap around my journal and then just tie lightly on the sides, or I could cut my tail down and bring it so that it ties around the front. For now I'm just going to leave it so that I could tie a little closure, and I'm quite liking the fact that there are threads on the side. I'll play around with those a little bit more where there's a very long one like this. I'm actually just going to snip that one off because that's too long, but the shorter ones I'm okay with. So that is now just the beginning of sorting out the closures and things, and we will start to embellish this in the next video.